Every trader thinks they're trying to beat the market, but after enough time, you realize something uncomfortable. The market was never your biggest opponent. Your biggest opponent was the person sitting in front of the screen, the beginner who entered because he was excited, the trader who changed strategies after 3 losses, the trader who closed a winning trade too early because he was afraid of losing the profit, the trader who stared at every candle, desperately searching for confirmation, and eventually the trader who stopped reacting to every candle. These aren't 5 different traders, they're 5 different versions of the same trader, maybe you. Because trading doesn't just change your bank account, it changes the way you think. And if you've been trading long enough, you already know that the biggest transformation doesn't happen on the chart, it happens inside your head. Welcome to NeuroTrader, where we go beyond charts and strategies to understand the psychology behind every trading decision. If you enjoy deep trading psychology like this, follow the channel. Now let's go back to the beginning, before the profitable trades, before the discipline, before the confidence, before you even knew what kind of trader you would become. The first time you open a trading chart, it doesn't look like an opportunity. It looks like chaos. Candles moving up and down, numbers changing constantly, green, red, green again. A line appears across the chart, then another. Someone tells you to add an RSI. Someone else says MACD is important. Another trader tells you to watch volume. Then you discover moving averages, support, resistance, liquidity, market structure, breakouts, fair value gaps, order blocks, and suddenly your chart looks like the cockpit of an airplane. You're staring at all of it, but you still have no idea where the plane is going. You start searching for answers. Late at night, you watch another trading video, then another, then another. Every video seems to contain one missing piece. One trader says trade breakouts, another says never trade breakouts. One says indicators are useless, another says this indicator gives 90% accuracy. Someone tells you to scalp, someone else tells you to swing trade. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop trying to understand the market. You start trying to find certainty. You believe that somewhere out there is a strategy that will finally remove the uncertainty. A perfect entry, a perfect signal, a perfect setup. A system where the market practically tells you, buy here. And then you take your first trade. Maybe it's a small position. Maybe it's only a few dollars. But the moment your own money enters the market, everything changes. Before the trade, the candle was just a candle. Now, that candle feels like a threat. Price moves slightly in your direction. Your heart jumps. You smile. You start imagining the profit. Then price pulls back. Your smile disappears. You move closer to the screen. You watch every tick. You tell yourself, it's fine, it's just a pullback. Price moves a little more against you. Now you're checking the chart again. Maybe you change the time frame. Maybe you look at another indicator. Maybe you start searching for someone else's opinion. You aren't analyzing anymore. You're looking for reassurance. And that's when trading teaches you its first real lesson. A lesson no indicator can teach. Knowing what you should do and actually doing it are 2 completely different skills. You close the trade. Maybe you win. Maybe you lose. But the result doesn't matter as much as what happens afterward. You stare at the chart. The market continues moving. It doesn't care that you just made your first trade. It doesn't pause. It doesn't congratulate you. It doesn't punish you. It simply keeps moving. And you start realizing something strange. The market was moving before you entered. It will keep moving after you leave. Your trade was never the center of the market. You were, at least inside your own head. That's when curiosity starts replacing confusion. You begin studying charts differently. You stop looking at every candle and start looking at relationships. Where did price react before? Where did momentum appear? Where did buyers lose control? Where did sellers step in? Why did that breakout continue? Why did this one fail? You start replaying historical charts. You freeze the candles. You make a prediction. Then you press play. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're completely wrong. But every wrong prediction teaches you something. You begin seeing patterns you couldn't see before. A level, a rejection, a liquidity sweep, a structure break, a failed breakout. And suddenly, the chart doesn't look completely random anymore. It starts looking like a language. You don't speak it fluently yet, but you're beginning to recognize a few words. This is where the first real level of a trader begins. Curiosity. You want to understand. You want to improve. You want to know why price moved. You start keeping screenshots. Maybe you create your first trading journal. You write down your entries, your exits, your mistakes, your emotions. And something unexpected begins appearing in those notes. The market has patterns, but so do you. You notice that you trade differently after a win. You notice that you hesitate after a loss. You notice that boredom makes you enter trades. You notice that excitement makes you abandon your plan. And slowly, you discover the uncomfortable truth. The chart isn't the only thing you're learning to read. You're learning to read yourself. The market becomes a mirror. Every impulsive entry shows you something. Every hesitation shows you something. Every revenge trade shows you something. Every time you follow your plan despite uncertainty, that shows you something too. And this is why the beginning of trading is so powerful. Because you think you're learning how to make money, but you're actually beginning a much longer journey. You're learning who you become when money is on the line. And you have no idea yet how many versions of yourself you're going to meet before you become the trader you're trying to become. Because this is only level 1. Chapter 2. The Trader Who Keeps Searching. At some point, curiosity turns into frustration. You know more than you did when you started. You understand charts better. You recognize patterns faster. You can explain why price reacted at a certain level. You know what a liquidity sweep looks like. You understand structure. You have a strategy. Maybe you even have a trading plan. And yet, your results still don't make sense. One week you're profitable, the next week you give everything back. You take 3 good trades, then one stupid trade wipes out the progress. You sit in front of the chart asking yourself, what am I still missing? So you start searching again. A new strategy appears. It looks better than yours. The entries look cleaner, the backtest look incredible. You think maybe this is it. You spend the next few days learning it. New rules, new confirmations, new setups, new screenshots. And for a while, you feel like you're finally making progress again. Then you take it live, and reality hits. The first setup loses, the second one loses, the third trade works. Then 2 more losses appear. Suddenly, the strategy that looked perfect on someone else's chart doesn't feel so perfect anymore. So you search again. Maybe the problem is the strategy. Maybe you need a better indicator. Maybe you need another confirmation. Maybe you need a different time frame. Maybe you need to change markets. And this cycle can continue for months, sometimes even years. You keep changing the system without realizing that the biggest variable hasn't changed: you. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. No strategy can remove uncertainty from trading. Even a strategy with a genuine edge will produce losing trades. Good setups will fail. Perfect-looking entries will reverse. Trades you skip will sometimes become huge winners. And trades you take with complete confidence will sometimes hit your stop within seconds. That's the market. But your brain doesn't like that answer. Your brain wants certainty. It wants to know that if you follow the rules, you will win. But trading doesn't work that way. And eventually, you begin noticing something strange. The strategy isn't always the problem. Sometimes your execution is. You have the same setup in front of you, the same rules, the same market, but 2 different versions of you can trade it completely differently. After 3 losses, you hesitate. After 2 wins, you become aggressive. When you're bored, you enter early. When you're afraid, you wait too long. The chart didn't change. Your state changed. And this realization can hurt, because it's much easier to blame a strategy than to examine yourself. If the strategy is broken, you can simply replace it. But if the problem is your behavior, there's nowhere to hide. You have to look directly at it. I remember how strange that realization can feel. You spend months studying the market. You learn concepts other beginners haven't even heard of. You can look at a chart and explain exactly why a setup should work. But then the live market opens, and suddenly your perfectly organized plan becomes difficult to follow. A setup appears. You recognize it immediately. Everything lines up. But you hesitate. You wait for one more confirmation, then another. By the time you enter, the move is already halfway finished. You finally click, and price pulls back. Now you're uncomfortable. You close early. Price immediately moves toward the target, and you sit there staring at the screen, thinking, I knew it. That's one of the most frustrating moments in trading, because your analysis was correct, your strategy was correct, but your execution wasn't. And that's when the next level begins. You stop asking, what's the best strategy? And you start asking, why can't I execute the strategy I already have? That question changes everything. You begin reviewing your trades differently, not just looking at whether they won or lost. You start looking at how you behaved. Why did you enter early? Why did you skip that setup? Why did you move the stop? Why did you close the winner? Why did you take another trade immediately after losing? The journal becomes more than a record of money. It becomes a record of your mind. And slowly patterns start appearing. You realize you don't have one trading personality. You have several. There's the confident version of you after a winning streak, the fearful version after a loss, the impatient version when nothing is happening, the aggressive version when you think you're on fire, and the disciplined version that appears when you are calm. They're all sitting in front of the same chart. The market doesn't create those personalities, it reveals them. And once you understand that, you stop searching for the magical strategy quite as often. You begin realizing that the next level of trading isn't about knowing more, it's about doing better with what you already know. Because knowledge can tell you where the setup is, but only discipline can stop you from waiting for it. Knowledge can tell you where the stop belongs, but only discipline can stop you from moving it. Knowledge can tell you that losses are normal, but only experience can teach you to actually accept one without changing your entire plan. This is the stage where trading starts becoming less exciting and much more real. You are no longer just learning the market, you're learning how difficult it is to follow yourself. And that realization is going to prepare you for the next level. Because once you stop searching for the perfect strategy, you finally have to face the real challenge, your own behavior. Chapter 3. The Trader Who Learns to Wait. At some point, something changes. You stop opening the chart asking, where can I enter? And you start asking a completely different question. Is there actually a reason for me to enter? That sounds like a small difference, but it changes everything. Earlier in your journey, every movement looked like an opportunity. Price moves up, maybe buy. Price drops, maybe sell. A candle breaks a level, maybe this is the move. A few minutes pass without a setup and suddenly you feel like you're wasting time. You feel the need to do something. But after enough screen time, enough bad trades, enough missed opportunities, and enough sessions where the market teaches you the same lesson repeatedly, you begin to understand something. You don't get paid for being active. You get paid for being selective. The chart can move for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even an entire hour without giving you a setup worth taking. And for the first time, that doesn't bother you. You simply watch. Price approaches a level you've marked earlier. You don't immediately click. You wait. Maybe liquidity is still sitting above the high. Maybe the structure hasn't shifted yet. Maybe momentum isn't strong enough. So you wait again. The candle closes. Nothing. Another candle forms. Still nothing. And instead of frustrated, you remain patient because you've learned what happens when you force a trade. Sometimes the entry works, but just as often the market gives you a small movement, pulls back, traps you inside the position, and reminds you why waiting matters. This is where trading starts becoming quieter, not easier, quieter. You still feel the temptation to enter, you still see moves you could potentially trade, but you no longer feel the need to participate in every one of them. Your attention becomes selective. You start treating your focus like capital. You don't spend it everywhere. You save it for the moments that actually matter. And then, eventually, the setup appears. Price reaches the level, liquidity gets swept, the rejection comes, momentum shifts. Everything you've been waiting for suddenly aligns. And when you finally enter, there's no rush, no excitement, no feeling that this trade has to work. You simply execute. Because the trade isn't important because you decided to take it, it's important because the market finally gave you the conditions you've been waiting for. That distinction is one of the biggest signs that a trader is evolving. The beginner wants action. The developing trader wants confirmation, but the experienced trader understands something deeper. Sometimes the best trade is the one you never take. And once you truly understand that, your relationship with the chart begins to change. You stop chasing the market. You stop trying to force opportunities. You stop feeling guilty when a session ends with 0 trades because you finally understand that doing nothing can also be a decision. And sometimes it's the most profitable decision you could make. Chapter 4: When losses stop controlling you. Eventually, something changes in the way you experience a losing trade. Earlier in your journey, a stop loss could ruin your entire day. The moment that red number appeared, your mind immediately went back to the entry. Why did I take that trade? I should have waited. Maybe I read the market completely wrong. And then you would open the chart again. Zoom in, look at the candles, search for the exact moment where everything supposedly went wrong. But the market doesn't give you an explanation. It simply keeps moving. The next candle forms, then another, and eventually you realize something uncomfortable. The loss is already finished. There is nothing left to fix. The stop loss wasn't an insult. It wasn't proof that you're a bad trader. It was simply the point where that particular trade stopped working. That's a completely different way of looking at a loss, and it takes experience to understand it. Because when you're starting out, you don't see a losing trade as one loss. You see it as a statement about yourself. One loss becomes, maybe my strategy doesn't work. Another loss becomes, maybe I'm not made for trading. And after a few losses in a row, the mind starts searching for revenge. You want the next trade to recover what you just lost. That's where one bad trade can become 3. 3 can become 5. And suddenly, you're no longer trading your strategy. You're trading your emotions. But somewhere along the journey, you begin noticing the pattern. The market doesn't care about your previous trade. Your next setup has no idea whether you just won or lost. The chart doesn't remember your frustration, so why should you carry it into the next decision? You take the loss, you record it, you review it later, and then you move on. The next setup appears. Maybe it's a perfect setup, maybe it's not, but now you're looking at it independently, not through the lens of the previous trade. That's when losses begin losing their power over you. They still sting, of course they do. You're still risking real money, but the emotional reaction becomes smaller. A losing trade becomes information. A winning trade becomes information, and both become part of the same thing, the larger sequence. Because experienced traders don't judge themselves from one trade. They judge the process across dozens of trades. They understand that even a strong strategy will produce losses. The goal was never to avoid every losing trade. The goal was to make sure that one losing trade never becomes the reason you destroy the next 10 decisions. And that is when you realize something powerful. You don't become a better trader by learning how to avoid losses. You become a better trader by learning how to lose without losing control. That is a completely different level of trading. Chapter 5: When you stop needing to be right. There is another level that almost every serious trader eventually reaches. It happens when you stop trying to prove that your prediction was correct. Because in the beginning, every trade feels like a prediction. You look at the chart and think, price is going up. So when price moves against you, it feels like you're wrong. And when price moves in your direction, it feels like you're right. Your confidence rises with every winning trade. Then one loss comes along and suddenly everything feels uncertain again. But experienced traders begin seeing the market differently. They don't need to be right about every move. They only need their process to make sense over a large enough sample of trades. That changes the way you react to the chart. You enter a setup, price moves against you slightly, you don't panic. You check the structure. Is the original idea still valid? If yes, you stay with the plan. If no, you exit. No argument, no hope, no attempt to convince the market that your analysis was correct. Because the market doesn't need to agree with you. It only needs to reveal what it's going to do. And sometimes that means your analysis will be wrong. That's normal. A professional trader can look at a position and say, I was wrong, then close it and move on. Without revenge, without frustration, without needing another trade to prove something. That's a massive psychological shift. You stop trading to protect your ego. You start trading to protect your capital. And those are two completely different mindsets. Your ego wants to be right. Your strategy only cares about managing risk. Your ego wants the market to validate your prediction. Your process only asks one question: was this a valid trade according to my rules? Once you start thinking this way, losing trades become much easier to handle. You can be wrong about the direction and still be right about your process. You can take a loss and still have executed a good trade. You can take a profit and still have executed a bad trade. That sounds strange at first, but that's the reality of probability-based trading. The outcome of one trade doesn't always tell you whether the decision was good. The quality of the decision becomes clearer when you look at the entire sequence, and that is where the trader begins to mature. You stop asking, "Did I win?" and start asking, "Did I execute correctly?" That question changes everything, because once you stop needing to be right, you finally become free to trade what you actually see. Chapter 6: When Trading Becomes Boring. This might be one of the strangest stages of becoming a better trader. Trading starts becoming boring, and that's actually a good thing. In the beginning, you wanted action, you wanted trades, you wanted the screen moving. Every session had to produce something. But now, you can sit in front of the chart for an hour and take nothing. No frustration, no desperation, just observation. Because you finally understood that the market doesn't owe you a trade. You don't need to make money every day. You don't need to recover yesterday's loss today. You don't need to prove that you're improving by constantly clicking buttons. Your job is much simpler. Wait for your conditions, execute when they appear, manage the risk, then step away. And this changes the entire feeling of a trading session. A setup appears, you take it. It loses, you accept it. Another setup appears later, you take that one too. Maybe it wins. You don't suddenly become overconfident. The results don't control your mood the way they used to, because you've stopped attaching your identity to every trade. You're no longer trying to win the day. You're trying to execute the process. That's when trading starts feeling almost boring. And strangely enough, that's when consistency can begin to appear. You don't need excitement anymore. You don't need the adrenaline of a huge position. You don't need to stare at every tick. You simply wait for your edge. The market can move without you. A massive breakout can happen while you're sitting on your hands. You might even watch a perfect setup move without taking it because one of your rules wasn't satisfied. And instead of feeling like you missed an opportunity, you feel something different: relief, because you know you didn't break your process just to participate. That's a level most beginners don't even realize exists. The goal isn't to make trading exciting. The goal is to make good decisions repeatable. And when the emotional highs and lows begin disappearing, trading becomes less like gambling and more like a professional routine. That is the moment you realize the best trader in the room isn't always the one making the most trades. Sometimes it's the one doing absolutely nothing. Chapter 7: The Trader Who Stops Chasing. At some point, you notice something that would have seemed impossible when you started. You don't care about catching every move anymore. Earlier, when price suddenly exploded, your first reaction was, "I have to get in." You would chase the candle, enter late, move the stop, hope the momentum continues. And sometimes it worked, which made the habit even more dangerous, because a bad decision that makes money can teach your brain the wrong lesson. But experience slowly changes that. Now, when you see a massive candle running without you, you don't immediately click. You watch. You let it go. Because you've learned that missing a trade is not the same as losing money. That's a huge difference. A missed opportunity costs you nothing. A forced trade can cost you much more. So you wait for the next opportunity. Maybe price pulls back into your level. Maybe structure forms again. Maybe it doesn't. And that's okay. You no longer need to chase the market because you finally understood something. There will always be another setup. Not necessarily today, not necessarily in the next hour, but the market isn't ending because you missed one move. This mindset creates a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence that says, "I know what price will do," but the confidence that says, "Whatever price does, I know what I'm going to do." That's real confidence. You don't need certainty about the market. You need certainty about your own rules. If the setup appears, you execute. If it doesn't, you wait. If the trade loses, you accept it. If it wins, you don't suddenly increase your risk. And if the market runs without you, you let it run. Because your goal isn't to capture everything. Your goal is to capture your edge repeatedly. That shift is what separates the trader who is constantly reacting from the trader who is actually in control. The market can move as fast as it wants. You don't have to move with it. And for the first time in your journey, you realize that patience isn't something you're forcing anymore. It's simply who you've become. Chapter 8. The highest level. You stop trying to control the market. Eventually, you reach a point where trading feels completely different. You still analyze the chart, you still mark levels, you still wait for your setups, but something inside you has changed. You no longer need the market to behave the way you want. Earlier, uncertainty was uncomfortable. You wanted confirmation. You wanted the perfect entry. You wanted to know that the trade would work before you took it. Now you understand that none of that is possible. The market can give you a perfect setup and still stop you out. It can give you a messy-looking setup and send price exactly where you expected. You don't control that. What you control is your preparation, your risk, your execution, and your response. That's it. And strangely, accepting that limitation gives you more confidence than trying to predict everything ever did. You sit down before the session, you know what you're looking for, you know what you're willing to risk, you know exactly what makes you stay out. Then the market opens. Maybe your setup appears, maybe it doesn't. You simply respond. No forcing, no chasing, no revenge, no desperation to finish the day green. The trader who reaches this level understands that trading isn't about controlling outcomes, it's about controlling behavior. Because over hundreds of trades, the market will produce everything. Wins, losses, missed opportunities, perfect entries, bad entries, unexpected reversals, beautiful trends, terrible conditions. You cannot control which one comes next, but you can control how you respond. And that's the real evolution of a trader. The beginner tries to predict the market. The frustrated trader tries to beat the market. The experienced trader tries to understand the market. But the mature trader finally realizes something deeper. You don't need to beat the market. You need to stop fighting it. You watch the candles move across the screen, the same candles that once confused you, the same market that once made you angry, excited, nervous, and impatient. And suddenly it feels quieter, not because the market became easier, because you became harder to shake. That's the highest level. Not perfect accuracy, not a massive win rate, not hundreds of trades, just the ability to sit in uncertainty, make a decision, accept the outcome, and remain the same trader afterward. That is when trading stops controlling you and you finally start controlling yourself. Final chapter, the trader you become. And after everything, the strategies, the losses, the missed trades, the emotional decisions, the endless hours staring at charts, you eventually realize something. The levels of a trader were never really about the market. They were about you. The beginner wanted certainty. The frustrated trader wanted a better strategy. The impatient trader wanted more action. The emotional trader wanted to recover losses. The experienced trader learned to wait. The disciplined trader learned to accept uncertainty. And eventually, the mature trader stopped trying to control things that were never under his control. That's the real journey. Because the market doesn't suddenly become predictable when you become experienced. You simply become better at responding to what you see. You don't need every trade to work. You don't need every prediction to be correct. You don't even need to trade every day. You just need to remain consistent enough to allow your edge to play out over time. And maybe that's the biggest lesson trading can teach you. You don't become a better trader when you finally learn how to win every trade. You become a better trader when losing a trade no longer changes who you are. When a missed move doesn't make you chase. When a winning streak doesn't make you reckless. When a losing streak doesn't make you desperate. When the market moves without you and you're completely okay with it. That's when you know you've changed. So if you're somewhere on this journey right now, remember something. You don't have to become the perfect trader tomorrow. You just have to become a little more aware than you were yesterday. One decision at a time, one session at a time, one mistake at a time. Because every trader you admired once sat exactly where you are sitting now, confused, frustrated, impatient, learning. And somewhere between the losses and the lessons, they became a different person. Maybe that's what trading is really about. Not becoming someone who can predict the market, but becoming someone who can remain calm no matter what the market does. This is NeuroTrader. If this video made you recognize yourself somewhere in these levels, follow the channel, because we're not just here to learn how to trade the market. We're here to understand the mind of the trader.